ladies. Hey, ladies. I'm so excited to join you in here for the first time live. I've managed to do it before in our on our business page, but this is the very first time I've done a Facebook live to you in here in the Wellbeing Forum. So first of all, a big hello and welcome if you've just joined us recently. I'm Sally Dibden and I run the Wellbeing Consultant. So I love all things health and I'm passionate about hormones. So I'm really glad that you voted to have this as our first topic in the Summer Body Love theme, because if there's one topic that's vital and literally the root of most problems to do with our health and our happiness as well, this isn't just simply about health problems or weight problems as such. This really is about our happiness and helping us to feel really happy in our own skin. So this Facebook Live today will be focused around hormones. That's what you voted for. It'll be focused on really why it's so important, and also then to offer a few solutions for particular problems. So I'm just wondering how to check the comments. So if you do have any comments, if you are here live, if you have any questions, then pop them in, because I'm just curious if I'll be able to find them really easily. So it'd be great if you could write hi in the comments so I can I know if I can see that all right before I get going with the content. Just a second and I will get better with the tech next time. Anyway, I can't see any comments, so do excuse me if I'm not seeing those. I will crack on and get on with what I think is super important for you to know. So hormones, a massive topic, and they're really at the root of everything in our body. Every reaction, every emotion behind it, the chemistry, the physiology is hormones and what's happening. That's why they're super important. So I hear all the time that women have things like headaches, premenstrual symptoms, they're coming up for perimenopause, it's earlier than they thought, they're going through the menopause, it's really not very pleasant. They're struggling with fertility problems, they're in pain and they're not healing very well, they're slow to heal. Their mood swings all over the place, they perhaps feel anxiety one day and they really feel absolutely fine the next day. Their periods are all over on the place and their obstetrician or their doctor has put them on a birth control pill, not for birth control but for hormone control. I could go on, the list is endless, and I just find it a bit of a shame sometimes because of our health systems that we know that we don't feel great, and when it gets to the point that's a real problem, we even go to our doctors about this. And our doctors often don't have the time. It's not a criticism on them. I'm trained in the medical system. I'm a physical therapist, so I'm well aware how highly trained our doctors are, but I'm also highly aware how little time they have to assess each patient. So if you're going into your doctor feeling, let's take anxiety for an instance. If you're going to your doctor saying that you feel a bit anxious, chances are he's already probably thinking that he'll put you on an antidepressant, when actually with a few little tweaks here and there in some other different things, then you may not actually need that. Now, that's a prime example, right? If you just joined us, I can't actually see who you are, so do pop a comment if you have any specific questions. I'd love to see if I can answer them here. I'll share a few details about my personal hormone story, and it'll perhaps enable you to relate to how scattered the symptoms can be. So I was super healthy in my 20s, complete adrenaline junkie, would do any sport and do really well on it. Lots of energy, no problems at all. I had my kids in my early 30s, I had them quite close together, and after this point of having my children, I found that my energy went down. Now, most mums, mums of young children, their energy is often low and drained. It's perfectly understandable. But it's often just assumed that that's because they're running around after children all day. And actually, it can sometimes be because their hormones are in disarray. And already at that point, there are clear signs that their hormones are imbalanced. And that's what we're looking at today, as signs of hormone imbalance. So At that point already, I was one of those. My hormones were imbalanced. Nobody told me, midwife didn't tell me that that might happen, and I have enough health knowledge to have perhaps picked it up, but it didn't really even enter my head. As the years went by and we had, some health struggles with our kids, and one particular demanded an enormous amount of energy over about a year. And by the end of that year, by the time, my kids were super healthy again and they were fine, I was completely and utterly exhausted to the point of what is classed as adrenal exhaustion or adrenal fatigue. You may have heard it being said. I was mildly in adrenal fatigue. So that is a term that sometimes the doctors don't recognize. They don't do the tests for it. And you don't even always need the tests. It can be glaringly obvious. If you speak to someone who knows about it, they can usually pick up the signs, as I'm pretty trained to do these days. So adrenal fatigue, you're particularly tired in the morning, for example, you can't get out of bed very easily, you have an afternoon slump, by tea time, you're reaching for the sugar or the wine to keep you going through that real afternoon slump. But then in the evening, you often wake up and feel great again. And so you work perhaps later in the evening because that's when you get all your jobs done. And then you end up going to bed late and then the cycle continues. So that's one example of a hormone imbalance. That was my story. Another story that I often hear, and that was part of my story as well, is a sugar addiction. So you might then, because you've started to reach for the sugar, you then set off a whole cycle of insulin resistance. And that can set off a whole problem that you crave your sugar even more, and yet you're putting on weight, and it's this whole vicious circle that goes round and round. So hormonal imbalances can be masked in all sorts of different ways, and another one that I often hear and see is weight gain. I work with a lot of very active people who love exercise. They're happy to go to the gym or do exercise every single day. And yet their systems are so exhausted that that's not actually what their systems need. So their hormones get imbalanced because they've got a mismatch between the exercise that their body is having against the exercise their body needs and the rest that they need. So basically, I think the overall principle from this first section of the live is to just grasp that once hormones are imbalanced, it causes a whole host of problems, from the way we feel, the way we look, and our health. And that is super, super important. If you've got big things you want to get up to in the world, you maybe have a business that you're passionate about running, or a job that you absolutely adore, or children that you want to have energy for at the end of your day when you're doing all these other things that you're so passionate about. So that's why our hormone health is super important. Now, if I don't see any specific questions, I will continue with my own take on it and what I think you need to know are the most important things. So I can't see any questions. Forgive me if I'm not picking them up here. I'm just seeing on the computer if it's coming through. No, I can't see any questions. So I will just cover then the next piece. So that's kind of the whole introduction about how the hormones are essentially stressed. That's what we're looking at, is a stressed system. And the body physiologically doesn't know the difference really between you being stressed to the point that you've got to, get out of the way of a car coming. That's stress to the body, and it's a useful stress because you have to get out of the way. There's an urgency to that. The body reacts to that stress in a certain way. Now, if you constantly stress your body with the wrong foods, the wrong exercise, the wrong thought patterns, you actually put your body into a constant state of stress, as if you were being chased away from a scene of crime. And that shows in your body by things like you can't get rid of weight, you don't actually breathe very well, you feel constantly anxious. Sometimes you don't even feel hungry, or reversely, you binge and eat. Yeah, so it can knock off the appetite, it can knock off the cravings as well. It's just massive signs of imbalance. Okay, so what do we do about it? we have all this imbalance going on, what to actually do about it? Well, I don't want to keep you here super long. I could go on for literally hours about this topic, and I would rather answer your questions and even do another Facebook Live another day on specific questions, as opposed to me rambling to myself about what I think you may want to know. So the two systems, hormonal systems, I wanted you just to be very aware of. The first one that is super important is all about insulin. So many people today are becoming insulin resistant. And what that means is because our bodies are loaded with carbohydrates, so by this I mean the bread, the pasta, the more obvious like sugar and cakes, grains, those kind of foods will need insulin to kick off, to digest them. It's just the way the hormone pathway works. So if that's what your diet is particularly heavy in, then that is why you will then have insulin spikes in your day. Now, insulin spikes don't feel great. They feel very, very imbalanced. They then are followed with insulin drops, which then make you feel absolutely and utterly exhausted. So insulin is one of the main hormones that drives our systems, and that's one that it's really, really helpful to know about the state of yours. Now, the main way to know is your energy levels is a really, really super gauge of that. If you've got good energy, if it's reasonable energy throughout the day, if you aren't craving sugar, then and your weight is at the level you'd like it to be, then chances are your insulin is reasonably balanced. It's a massive general assumption, but that you know, to give you some guidelines to go with. So that's one hormonal pathway, because once we become insulin resistant, then we don't produce the insulin when we need it, and we end up being so insensitive to insulin that we have these spikes all over the place, and it's massively disruptive on all our hormone systems, because the insulin is one of the drivers of your systems. So that's one hormone I want you to be aware of. And the only other one I'm going to mention is the cortisol and the adrenaline stress response hormone as well, because that's the other driver. And the reasons these ones are super important is because if you're in the stress response really, really often, like I mentioned earlier, then the hormones that get released are the cortisol, the adrenaline. And if this is through exercise, it'll be endorphins as well. So the endorphins make you feel great. So you'll feel wonderful when you're exercising. That's not the problem. But the problem is you literally run out of cortisol afterwards. Yeah, not necessarily immediately. It's a long-term thing. And as you run out of this cortisol, then things have to happen behind the scenes to rebalance that, because the body is all about rebalance. If you get too much of one thing, then you have to balance that by an effect. It's everything has a counter effect. So the way the body balances from too much use of cortisol is it does a nifty little shift, and it steals another hormone called pregnenolone. It's called the pregnenolone steal. And what happens then is that hormone system, I'll try and keep it super simple, is in charge of everything from your sex hormones to your healing hormones. And so you will heal very slowly, you will have no sex drive, you'll be exhausted, all those kind of problems ensue. So you may not realize what's going on, because you'll still want to exercise, you'll still want to go to the gym, because that's how you get your buzz, that's how you get your up. But then the downs are really not very pleasant, and you'll be following again these energy spikes. So that's why energy is such a real vital sign for you to follow. And this may sound like we're talking primarily, to late 30s or early 40s, and perhaps the adrenal fatigue symptoms are often in that age group. Although what we're finding is that earlier and earlier women are having these problems. So, of course, you can imagine that if in your late 20s, early 30s, you're having these massive stress responses going on, that's not going to put your body in a very receptive place to conceive either. So so many more women are having problems conceiving, and that's not a huge surprise. When the world is becoming such a stressful place, then the body is going to protect you, and it's not going to want to bring children into a body that feels too stressed to handle them. So it's not always the case, and I'm not negating the problems that can also be very different to, hormone imbalances for that specific problem. But it's an example where it can be massively improved. The chances of fertility can be massively improved if your hormones are balanced, and that can be done very, very naturally. So they're the two systems I wanted you to be very aware of, the insulin system and the cortisol system. Because once those two are tuned and balanced, you will naturally find that you have great energy. You will naturally find that you are at your ideal weight, and that's different for everyone. So we're not all talking here about being complete skinny minis. We're talking about being at what's your ideal weight for you. And whilst I'm on that topic, it is what is the exact reason why diets do not work, usually, invariably, because they're very, very often based on calories and reducing calories, and they don't take into account the insulin pathway. And you can imagine that if your insulin pathway is often stressed on these diets, you go on it for a week or 2 weeks and it goes a bit haywire. And then when you come back to your normal eating, the insulin's all over the place again because it doesn't quite know what's happened. So the last thing it is doing is giving you a stable insulin level, which is really what you're looking for to keep at your ideal weight, because insulin literally pushes weight onto your bum. That's kind of how it works. So yeah, it's all to do with carbohydrates and having the right balance of carbs, proteins and fats in your diet. So it needs to be balanced quite intricately, but that's essentially the solution. So I'll move on to solutions. That is one of them, is your diet is exactly what you eat. So does anyone have any questions before I go on about that? I can't see any, so I will just finish with that because we're past the 15 minutes. I didn't want to ramble too much, but it looks like I have. So nutrients and diet are the number one way that you can control your hormones for all the effects that we've already discussed. To balance out headaches, to balance out premenstrual symptoms, to balance out signs of early perimenopause and problems with your periods if they're getting too close together or too heavy. To have a healthy menopause kind of later on. My speciality is really these stress hormones. That's what I work a lot with. That's what I see. Even my physiotherapy clients who come through the door with pain are invariably stressed. So it feeds into almost every client I see, whether it's a physiotherapy client or my life coaching clients. Or often they haven't got the clarity, or they're overwhelmed, or there's so much they need to do. And when we just settle down their systems, suddenly it's like the curtains are open and they can see clearly. So that's why it's important. Nutrients. So the number one thing to do is consider, I will give you 3 tips because I don't want this to be an overwhelming amount of things to do. So my number one tip is to take into account where you're at with your balance in your foods between your carbohydrates, your proteins and your fats. So carbohydrates include the starchy things that we perhaps already are very aware of, the potatoes, the rice, the pasta, the cereal, that kind of thing. So if it's those kind of low nutrient dense foods, then they aren't usually a great food group for us if we're trying to balance our hormones, because they send our insulin on spikes, and we don't like spikes when we're looking at balanced hormones. So that's the number one to look out for. We're looking at reducing those, and having the carbohydrates still need to be in there, but bear in mind that things like your vegetables are in the carbohydrate group. They do have some protein and things in them as well, but it's primarily in that group, as is fruit. So you would want plenty of fruit and vegetables in your diet. The common advice of like 5 portions a day, I would ramp that up to more like, well, ideally 10, but that might seem a little bit too far from where you're at. So even if you get your 5 and ramped it up to 7, that would be great. and just making sure that the proportion of that, if we're talking vegetables to fruit, would be, say, 4 portions of fruit, even 5 to 2 fruits, because the fruit is sugar, it's natural sugar, so certainly not looking at taking away. It's got loads of good minerals and vitamins in it, but just make sure you're not too fruit heavy. So that can make up the majority really of your carbohydrate requirements. Then you move into your proteins and you move into your fats. There isn't time to explore all of those today, but just to know that you're just making sure that you're not too heavy in the carbohydrate family, okay? That's the number 1 thing. Number 2 thing would be to consider your exercise rest ratio. If you're exhausted, if you're exercising on an exhausted system, you are going to do one thing, and that's to make it more exhausted. So exercise is great. I'm a big fan of exercise, but it needs to be done in the right doses. And you need to know where your energy is at for that. So sometimes if you are someone who wants to run every day, you may find that actually that's not what your body's craving. It may actually prefer to go for a walk that day. So you're looking at balancing out your exercise as well as your food. Okay, so the 2 biggies that make the biggest difference. And one final simple one that a lot of women are deficient in is a vitamin D. Vitamin D actually works almost like a hormone. That's why it's such a vital vitamin. It should be taken more in the pipette form, in a liquid form, and it can be taken in reasonably high doses. Unless you are on holiday in the sun all day, chances are you may be a little bit low in vitamin D. A lot of my clients, particularly the ones with chronic fatigue and those kind of problems, are low in vitamin D. So that can be taken daily. If you have any questions about that, you want to know doses, I'll pop those in afterwards, because it can be a little bit difficult to get your head around verbally. So do ask below if you have any questions on that. And they were your 3 tips. So you've got nutrients, you've got your exercise balance, and you've got your vitamin D. I think there was one question here. How can I counter? Hi Tanya, how can I counteract the exhaustion? Yeah. Okay, exhaustion premenstrually is super. Okay, yeah, great question, Tanya. How to counteract the exhaustion you feel coming up to pre-period? So the first thing is cut your exercise pre-period. If I was dealing with athletes, for example, I would cut their exercise by literally half premenstrually, and those days that you're completely exhausted. So particularly the first day of your period, you might want to not do any exercise apart from walking. It depends when you feel the super fatigue, whether sometimes that's like 2 or 3 days before. Ideally, you're trying to catch it before it's already happened. So coming up to that phase, you would want to make sure you've got enough iron. So you might even want an iron supplement. There is another possibility. Magnesium is another one that throws us off. So we're possibly looking at supplementing there to start. It's balancing out the supplements with the I wouldn't just put you on supplements if I didn't know where you were at with your food and your exercise. So it's only because I know Tanya, I know that she has a reasonable diet already. I know to a certain extent, I don't know your ins and outs these days, Tanya, but I'm guessing with your exercise, you're quite smart. So, you're not looking at going for a 4-mile run these days that you feel really tired, right? There might be phases in your month that you feel absolutely fine and loads of energy to do that, but just premenstrually, if that's your struggle right now, they are not those days. Okay, so you definitely drop your exercise down to walking, more stretching, more your pilates, more your yoga, those kind of exercises for now. It's not necessarily long term. But whilst you're feeling that exhausted, and you perhaps tweak away with the food and the supplements to get things rebalanced there, would then hopefully enable you to have more of the energy you would want as well. Okay, I hope that answers your question, Tanya. Feel too tight? Yeah. So yeah, if you're too tired to exercise, you really shouldn't be exercising. It's as simple as that. This is the food and the emotional energy that needs to be managed there. I hope that helps. Okay, so that's any more questions. If I can't see it anymore, and I don't want to keep you on too long, guys. So I will love you and leave you there. This is such a massive topic. I'm totally happy to do another one. So if you missed this or if you have any other questions, pop them in below and I would be more than happy to do another live at any point. Do just bear in mind the disclaimer on the side, okay? I am more than happy to advise people on an individual basis. This is it for information purposes only. I do not know your individual symptoms, and so I cannot possibly give you an individual solution, but I'm more than happy at any point to chat with you totally free of charge for a 20-minute chat. So if this has been helpful to you, don't hesitate to do that. Otherwise, pop your questions below and that will give me food for thought for our next topic. Take care, everyone. Have a brilliant day. Bye-bye.